It was a cold autumn evening when Mara decided to explore the abandoned Asher Manor, a sprawling estate on the outskirts of town. Rumors had surrounded the manor for decades. Tales of disappearances, strange lights, and ghostly figures roaming the halls. Mara, an amateur paranormal investigator with a small but devoted online following, had always been drawn to places with a dark history. But something about Asher Manor called to her more than any other site. As she approached the crumbling gates, the wind whispered through the trees, carrying a chill that seemed to seep into her bones. The manor loomed ahead, its windows shattered, paint peeling, and roof sagging like the weary shoulders of an old man. Even from the overgrown driveway, her flashlight cut through the gathering darkness, illuminating the mansion's grotesque statues and ivy-choked walls. Each step on the cracked stone path echoed unnaturally, as if the manor itself was listening. A sudden movement in one of the upper windows made her heart leap. A fleeting shadow, vanishing before she could focus. Just the wind, she muttered to herself, but unease prickled at the edges of her mind. Inside, the air was thick with dust and decay. The grand hall was littered with remnants of a bygone era. Shattered chandeliers, rotting furniture, and portraits of stern-faced ancestors whose eyes seemed to follow Mara's every move. Her recorder was on, capturing every creak, whisper, and sigh of the old house. As she ventured deeper, a cold draft swept through the corridors, carrying with it a faint, almost imperceptible whisper. Leave before it's too late. Mara froze. The voice was distant, layered beneath the sound of the wind and the settling of the old structure. Yet it was unmistakable, a warning, not just a sensation. Determined not to let fear control her, she pressed on, unaware that each step took her closer to a presence that had been waiting decades for someone daring or foolish enough to enter. As Mara continued down the long, narrow corridor, the faint whispering grew louder, more insistent. It seemed to swirl around her, coming from the walls themselves, a fragmented chant that made her skin crawl. She paused near a doorway, peering into what had once been a grand library. The air here was heavier, almost viscous, as if the room itself resisted her presence. Books lay scattered across the floor, their pages yellowed and torn, yet a single volume sat upright on a pedestal, untouched by time or dust. Its cover bore no title, only an embossed symbol that Mara didn't recognize. A circle intersected by jagged lines, like fractured lightning frozen in metal. Compelled, she reached out, fingers trembling, and opened it. The pages were filled with cryptic markings, sketches of humanoid figures with twisted limbs, and notes in a handwriting that seemed almost alive, shifting when she tried to focus. A cold wind blew through the library, slamming the door shut behind her, plunging the room into darkness except for the pale glow of her flashlight. Mara's heart raced as she realized she was no longer alone. From the shadows, a figure emerged. It was tall and thin, impossibly elongated, with eyes like molten silver that reflected her flashlight's beam. It didn't speak, yet Mara understood it could see into her very thoughts. She stumbled backward, dropping the book, but the figure didn't move closer. It simply watched, patiently, like a predator assessing its prey. Her recorder had begun to pick up sounds she couldn't hear with her own ears. Low hums, whispers layered upon whispers, almost like dozens of voices speaking in unison. Mara's rational mind screamed at her to leave, to run, yet something about the figure's presence was hypnotic, almost magnetic. She felt a pull, a strange compulsion to step closer, to understand what it wanted, what it needed from her. Suddenly, the temperature dropped dramatically. Her breath came out in white puffs, and frost began forming on the edges of the book and the nearby furniture. A single word echoed through the library, louder than all else: remember. Mara felt a jolt of fear mixed with curiosity. What was she supposed to remember? The manor's tragic history? The countless souls who had vanished? Or something far older, far more sinister, hidden within the walls of Asher Manor for centuries? Mara's mind raced as she tried to process the single word, remember. She bent down and picked up the book once more, hoping for answers, but the pages had changed. The cryptic sketches were now replaced with illustrations of people she recognized, friends, neighbors, even strangers she had passed on the street. Beneath each figure were dates and locations, some recent, some decades old, all connected to the manor in ways she could not comprehend. The silver-eyed figure remained silent, its gaze unwavering, and Mara realized it wasn't here to harm her. Not yet. It wanted her to see, to understand, to acknowledge what had been hidden. She flipped through the book frantically, tracing the lines of ink that seemed to shimmer under the flashlight's beam, revealing memories she had never lived. She saw herself walking the halls as a child, though she had never been here before. Then the whispers shifted. No longer unintelligible, they began forming words, phrases, fragments of conversations long lost to time. Mara heard the manor's past residents, their voices filled with sorrow, fear, and occasional rage. They recounted nights of torment, unexplained disappearances, and rituals performed under the cover of darkness. The silver-eyed figure's form seemed to blur with each revelation, merging with the shadows, becoming part of the history it was showing her. Mara felt an overwhelming urge to write everything down, to preserve the truth she was uncovering. But the book resisted her touch, pages flipping on their own, stopping at a drawing of a hidden chamber deep beneath the manor. The sketch was detailed, showing a spiraling staircase descending into darkness with symbols etched into the walls, symbols identical to those she had seen earlier on the pedestal book cover. As her flashlight flickered, she realized time was slipping away. The manor's supernatural presence was intensifying, almost impatient, urging her to descend, to confront whatever lay beneath. Fear battled with curiosity inside her. Every instinct screamed to run, yet the need to uncover the truth was stronger. Taking a deep breath, Mara approached the spot indicated in the sketch, brushing aside debris and opening a concealed trapdoor. A cold draft rose from below, carrying the scent of earth and decay. And as she peered into the darkness, she knew there was no turning back. What awaited her was both revelation and terror, an encounter that would forever bind her to Asher Manor's haunted legacy. Mara took a tentative step down the spiraling staircase, each creak echoing like a warning through the empty manor. The air grew colder, heavier, pressing against her chest as though the house itself was breathing down her neck. Shadows twisted around the walls, forming shapes that seemed almost human, yet not. Whispers persisted, now almost coherent, urging her forward, speaking of secrets too long buried. At the bottom, she found a vast underground chamber, dimly lit by a ghostly, ethereal glow emanating from the walls. The symbols from the sketch pulsed faintly, as if alive, reacting to her presence. In the center of the room stood a stone altar, aged and cracked, and upon it rested a collection of personal artifacts, jewelry, letters, photographs, all belonging to those who had vanished over the centuries. Mara's heart pounded. She realized these were the manor's collected memories, the lives absorbed into its essence, each one a fragment of the haunting history she had glimpsed in the book. A chill ran down her spine as the silver-eyed figure appeared at the far end of the chamber. No longer just a shadow, but a fully formed presence, radiating a mixture of sorrow and authority. Mara understood then that this entity was the keeper of the manor's legacy. Neither malevolent nor kind, simply bound to reveal the truth to those willing to see it. It raised a spectral hand toward the altar, and suddenly Mara was flooded with visions, painful memories of loss, betrayal, and hidden truths of the manor's past. Tears streamed down her face as she comprehended the weight of centuries, the darkness interwoven with the lives of countless souls. But with understanding came acceptance. Mara realized that the hauntings, the whispers, the apparitions were not mere malice. They were memories seeking acknowledgement, demanding that their stories not be forgotten. With trembling hands, she retrieved the book and began to record every detail she could remember, transcribing the stories, the symbols, and the spirit's messages. Hours passed in what felt like moments, and when she finally looked up, the chamber was quiet. The silver-eyed figure had vanished, leaving only a lingering warmth, a sense of closure, as if the house had been waiting for her to bear witness. Ascending the staircase, Mara stepped back into the main hall, the sun beginning to rise and light spilling through the broken windows. The manor no longer seemed purely menacing. It held a solemn dignity, a place where past and present converged. She knew she would return, not out of curiosity, but out of respect for the lives entwined with its walls. And as she walked away, the whisper of a single word followed her one last time. Remember. Mara had survived the night, but more importantly, she had become part of Asher Manor's story, its memory, its witness, and its reluctant guardian. It was a crisp autumn evening when Jonathan received a call that would change his perception of reality forever. An old friend, Mark, sounded unnervingly tense, urging Jonathan to visit a secluded cabin deep within the Smoky Mountains. Mark's voice was strained, almost pleading, but he refused to give any details over the phone. Intrigued and concerned, Jonathan packed his bag, grabbed his camera, and set out, unaware that this trip would plunge him into an encounter far beyond anything he had ever imagined. The drive to the cabin was uneventful at first. The winding mountain roads, lit by the dim glow of the setting sun. But as Jonathan ventured deeper, the forest thickened and an unnatural stillness descended. Birds had fallen silent, and even the wind seemed hesitant, whispering through the trees in a way that carried an unspoken warning. By the time he reached the last mile, the road had become almost unrecognizable. Finally, the cabin came into view, a modest wooden structure, but something about it felt off. The windows were dark, reflecting the encroaching night like black mirrors, and the door hung slightly ajar, swaying gently as if inviting him in. Jonathan hesitated, gripping his flashlight, but curiosity and concern overpowered caution. He pushed the door open, the hinges groaning in protest, and stepped inside. Dust covered every surface, and the faint smell of decayed wood lingered in the air. A fireplace, long unused, held charred remains of logs, and on the walls hung old photographs, family portraits, landscapes, and some that were too faded to make. He followed the marks cautiously, each step echoing ominously through the silent house. The back room door was slightly cracked, and a faint glow emanated from within. Jonathan pushed it open, revealing a scene that made his blood run cold. An antique mirror, tall and ornate, stood in the center of the room. Its glass shimmered with an unnatural light, as if something beneath the surface was trying to break free. And in the reflection, he saw a figure standing behind him, a shadowy form, indistinct but unmistakably there. Jonathan spun around, but the room was empty. His heart pounded in his chest as he struggled to catch his breath. The mirror, however, did not lie. The shadowy figure remained motionless, watching him from within its glassy prison. Goosebumps rose on his arms, and an icy chill crawled up. The air in the cabin grew heavy, almost suffocating, as if the walls themselves were closing in. A low, whispering sound began to echo around him, indecipherable at first, like the hushed conversations of unseen entities. Then he realized the whispers were coming from the mirror itself. Words formed, slowly, deliberately, chilling Jonathan to the bone. Leave or join us. Shaking, Jonathan took a step back, but the floor beneath him creaked loudly, and he felt a sudden tug, like an invisible hand trying to pull him toward the mirror. Panic surged through him, and he lunged away, stumbling across the wooden floor. The whispers intensified, overlapping in a cacophony of voices, all pleading, all mocking, all desperate. Desperate to escape, Jonathan noticed an old journal lying on a dusty table nearby. The cover was cracked, the pages yellowed with age. He picked it up and began to flip through it. The handwriting inside was jagged, hurried, and chaotic, filled with accounts of people who had visited this cabin over the decades. Each entry told a similar story. Strange noises, fleeting shadows, mirrors reflecting things that weren't there, and eventually, the disappearance of the visitor. One entry in particular caught his attention. The mirror is not just a reflection, it is a window, a gateway for those who dare to look too long. They wait, they watch, and if you see them, they see you. Jonathan's hands trembled as he read the final line. Do not look for them. Once seen, they are yours forever. A sudden movement in the mirror made him snap his head up. The shadowy figure had shifted, stepping closer, its form becoming clearer, human-like, yet twisted, its features blurred and ever-changing. Jonathan realized he had only seconds to act. He grabbed a heavy chair from the corner and swung it at the mirror, shattering the glass into jagged pieces. The sound was deafening, and for a moment, everything went silent. The shards of glass scattered across the floor, glinting like frozen fire in the dim moonlight that filtered through the cabin windows. For a fleeting moment, Jonathan felt a rush of relief. The oppressive weight in the air seemed to lift slightly, and the whispers had vanished. But that relief was short-lived. From the fragments of the mirror, tiny, almost imperceptible shapes began to crawl and twist, forming miniature versions of the shadowy figure. They slithered across the floor like living smoke, whispering his name in hollow, haunting tones. They will not rest until you join the reflection. A cold wind surged through the cabin, extinguishing the candles and plunging him into darkness. Panic gripped him as he fumbled for his phone, only to find it dead. Jonathan realized that the figure in the mirror had multiplied, now surrounding him from every direction, emerging from the corners of the broken glass and the reflections in every surface. Their forms shifted constantly, one moment human, the next grotesque and animalistic, with elongated limbs and hollow, staring eyes. The air itself seemed alive, vibrating with their presence, pressing against his chest, making it almost impossible to breathe. He remembered a faint memory from one of the journal entries. Survivors spoke of mirrors as anchors, the key to keeping the spirits contained. He needed to sever the connection. But how? Desperation fueled his actions. He grabbed the largest shards he could find and began stabbing them into the remaining mirror frame, breaking it apart as much as possible. With each strike, suddenly, a deafening crash echoed through the cabin. The largest shard fell with a heavy thud, releasing a blinding flash of light that forced Jonathan to shield his eyes. When the light dimmed, he found himself alone, the shadows gone, the oppressive atmosphere lifted. The broken mirror lay in fragments, and the journal on the floor now contained only blank pages. Jonathan sank to the floor, trembling, the weight of exhaustion and fear pressing down on him. The cabin was silent now, save for the faint creak of the wooden walls settling and the distant hoot of an owl outside. The shadows, the whispers, the crawling forms, all of it had vanished, leaving only the cold, still air and the shattered remnants of the mirror. He slowly got to his feet and surveyed the room. The journal lay open at his feet, pages blank as if the horrors it had once chronicled had been wiped clean. For a moment, he wondered if it had all been a hallucination, a product of his fear and isolation. But the shards of glass still glittered on the floor, and the faint scorch marks around the mirror frame told him otherwise. Jonathan knew one thing. He could never leave that cabin. Not yet. The journal, now empty, had a power of its own, and the mirror had been only one of many anchors scattered across the world. If he left, the entity might find another vessel, another reflection through which to manifest. He needed to understand, to research, to prepare. Hours passed. He cleaned the shards as best he could and barricaded the windows, trying to create a sense of safety. Deep down, he knew it wasn't enough. The whispers, though gone, had left a mark on his mind, an imprint of fear that would not easily fade. And in the dark corners of the cabin, just beyond the reach of his candlelight, he could almost feel them watching, waiting for the moment he faltered. When dawn finally broke, casting pale light across the forest outside, Jonathan stepped outside for the first time in what felt like days. The morning air was crisp, carrying the scent of pine and earth, a stark contrast to the suffocating gloom inside. He took a deep breath, vowing silently to uncover the truth behind the haunted mirrors and the spirits that lurked within them. As he walked toward the gravel road that led to civilization, he couldn't shake the lingering feeling that some part of the darkness had followed him. Every reflective surface he passed, a puddle, a window, even the shiny hood of a parked car, seemed to ripple with faint, shadowy movements. But the entity was not gone. It was a rainy October evening when Emily first noticed the old, abandoned asylum at the edge of town. She had driven past it countless times, but had never dared to approach. Its crumbling facade, boarded up windows, and rusted gates spoke of decades of neglect and whispered stories of tortured souls. That night, however, curiosity got the better of her. She parked her car on the gravel path and, umbrella in hand, stepped toward the massive iron gate. The wind howled through the empty corridors as she pushed the gate open, its hinges squealing like a scream in the dark. Emily hesitated at the threshold, the rain soaking her coat, but the thrill of exploring the main entrance doors were ajar, inviting her into a shadowy foyer where peeling paint hung like tattered curtains, and the smell of damp decay filled her nose. Old wheelchairs were overturned, and a faded sign read, "Admissions, 1947. Emily's flashlight flickered, casting eerie shadows that seemed to move independently of her own. She felt a chill creep down her spine, a sense that she wasn't alone. She began to explore, room by room. The patients' quarters were lined with metal-framed beds, rusting and empty, but each seemed to hold a memory of the past. Emily imagined the people who had slept there, their fears, their despair, their fleeting moments of joy. In one corner, a small journal lay on the floor, its pages yellowed and brittle. She picked it up, and the handwriting inside told stories of strange occurrences, whispers in the night, shadows moving on their own. As she read, A sudden sound echoed through the hallway, a door slamming shut, somewhere deep within the asylum. Emily froze, heart racing. The journal slipped from her hands, and she caught a glimpse of movement at the far end of the corridor. It was faint, almost like a shadow flitting just beyond the reach of her flashlight. Despite her fear, Emily felt compelled to follow. She moved cautiously, each step echoing through the abandoned halls. The deeper she ventured, the colder it became, the air heavy with the weight of something unseen. The whispers began, soft, almost imperceptible at first, like someone speaking just behind her. She strained to hear, but the words were jumbled, fragments of sentences that made no sense, yet seemed to convey a warning. And then, at the end of the corridor, she saw it. A door slightly ajar, a faint flickering light spilling through the crack. Emily approached, heart pounding. Emily's hand trembled as she reached for the doorknob, the metal cold and slick from the dampness. Pushing the door open, she stepped into a small room that seemed almost untouched by time. Dust motes danced in the weak light of a broken ceiling lamp, and old medical equipment lay scattered across the floor. The air smelled of mildew and something faintly metallic, like blood. In the center of the room was a single chair, an old psychiatrist's chair, facing a large, cracked mirror on the wall. Emily felt an inexplicable pull toward it, as if the chair itself was a magnet for her attention. She approached slowly, her reflection wavering in the fractured glass. But then she realized it wasn't just her reflection. Behind her in the mirror, a shadow moved, lingering just out of sight when she turned her head. A sudden, icy chill enveloped the room, and the whispers grew louder, forming fragmented words. Emily could make out phrases like, "Why are you here?" and "You shouldn't have come." Her breath fogged in the cold air, and panic clawed at her chest. She tried to convince herself it was her imagination, the mind playing tricks in the darkness, but the feeling of being watched was undeniable. Then she noticed the journal again, lying near the base of the chair. She bent down to pick it up and realized the pages had changed. New entries appeared, written in a hurried, frantic script, describing her movements, her fears, even her thoughts. The words seemed to shift and twist before her eyes, as if the asylum itself was alive, recording her every action. Emily's pulse quickened. She wanted to run, but something, curiosity perhaps, or an unseen force, kept her rooted in place. The whispers intensified, now forming coherent sentences. "We remember you. You belong here. Forever." A shadow coalesced in the corner of the room, dark and fluid, writhing as if it were made of smoke. She stumbled back nearly tripping over a rusted tray of medical instruments. The shadow moved closer, and Emily could feel its cold presence pressing against her very soul. Panic turned to terror as she realized there was no easy escape. The asylum seemed to stretch endlessly, corridors multiplying, doors appearing where none had existed moments before. Her flashlight flickered, violently plunging the room into darkness for a heartbeat. And when it returned, the shadow had vanished. But the whispers lingered, now echoing from all directions, surrounding her, suffocating her with their unrelenting insistence. Emily's mind raced. How had she wandered so deep into a place that seemed to defy the laws of reality itself? Then, from somewhere deep within the asylum, a door slammed with deafening force. And Emily knew she had to keep moving, following the dim light ahead, hoping it would lead her out before the asylum claimed her completely. Out. Emily pressed onward, her flashlight trembling in her grip, the beam slicing through the thick darkness like a fragile lifeline. The asylum's corridors seemed to twist unnaturally, doors appearing and disappearing, as if the building itself was alive, reshaping to trap her. Each step echoed unnervingly, though sometimes the sound seemed delayed, as though she were moving through water rather than solid ground. The whispers never ceased. They layered over one another, breeding a cacophony that clawed at her mind. You cannot leave. You will join us forever. One voice, deeper and colder than the rest, resonated directly inside her skull, causing her teeth to chatter uncontrollably. Emily's heart pounded so hard, she feared it would burst through her chest. She stumbled upon a narrow staircase, the metal steps rusted but stable. Without hesitation, she ascended, feeling a magnetic pull leading her higher. At the top, a long hallway stretched endlessly, lined with portraits of patients who had supposedly vanished decades ago. Their eyes seemed alive, following her every movement, and Emily felt a peculiar weight on her shoulders, as if the eyes themselves bore down on her soul. At the far end of the hallway, a faint light flickered under a cracked door. Emily moved cautiously toward it, every instinct screaming that this was her only chance. But as she reached for the knob, a cold, skeletal hand shot out from the gap beneath the door and clutched her ankle. She fell to the floor, pain shooting through her leg, and the whispers intensified to a deafening roar. Desperate, Emily swung her flashlight blindly, the beam cutting across the darkness. In the brief illumination, she glimpsed countless shadowy figures, writhing and twisting, their mouths open in silent screams. Each figure appeared to be reaching for her, their black eyes hollow, yet impossibly knowing, as if they understood her deepest fears and secrets. Summoning every ounce of courage, Emily kicked at the door with her free leg. The hand recoiled, and she scrambled through the opening, finding herself in a small, dimly lit office. Papers were scattered across a desk, and an old recorder sat in the corner, playing a loop of shrill, distorted voices. On the wall behind the desk, a large map of the asylum had been pinned, with red markings tracing paths she didn't recognize, paths she had already taken. The room pulsed with an otherworldly energy, the shadows creeping along the walls, as though alive. Emily knew she was close to the heart of whatever entity haunted this place, and every instinct screamed that confronting it might be the only way to survive. Emily took a trembling breath and stepped deeper into the office, her eyes scanning every corner for any clue or threat. The shadows swirled faster now, forming shapes that were almost human, but grotesquely wrong. Elongated limbs, twisted faces, mouths opening impossibly wide as they whispered her name. She realized the whispers weren't coming from the shadows themselves, but from inside her head, echoing her own fears, memories, and regrets. At the center of the room, a large, cracked mirror reflected not her image, but that of a pale, gaunt woman with hollow eyes and a sorrowful expression. Emily froze. The woman raised a trembling hand and mouthed words she could somehow understand. "You shouldn't be here, but it's too late." The air grew colder, her breath visible in icy plumes, and the walls seemed to pulse with the rhythm of a heartbeat, not hers, but something else, something older. Panic surged, and Emily instinctively grabbed the recorder, smashing it to the floor. The shrill voices ceased instantly, replaced by an eerie silence so thick it pressed down on her chest. The shadows recoiled, curling into themselves, as if wounded by the sudden absence of sound. Gathering every ounce of courage, Emily darted toward the stairwell, feeling the pull of freedom calling her name. As she descended, the asylum seemed to twist one last time. Hallways that had seemed infinite now shortened. Doors that had been locked swung open as if welcoming her escape. Emily's legs burned with exertion, but adrenaline kept her moving. Finally, she burst through the front doors into the pale light of dawn. The asylum loomed behind her, silent as if nothing had happened. Emily collapsed on the dew-soaked grass, heart pounding, eyes wide with lingering terror. Behind her, she thought she saw a figure in the window, a pale woman, watching her leave, eyes full of sorrow, yet acceptance. Emily never returned to the asylum, but at night, when the wind whispers through the trees, she sometimes swears she hears the faint echo of footsteps behind her and a soft, mournful voice calling her name. The experience left her changed. She carried the memory, the fear, and the whispering shadows with her. A reminder that some places hold secrets that refuse to stay buried, and some spirits never truly rest.